Hi everyone. This week's lab is on the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is the second control system. We've already studied the nervous system, which is the quick, very specific, short-lasting control system. The endocrine system it takes longer to work. It targets specific cells, and its effect lasts longer. When we're thinking about the endocrine system, obviously endocrine glands produce hormones, and those hormones circulate through the bloodstream, and eventually they're going to bump into a cell that has the right receptor for those hormones. And the cells that have the receptors for those hormones, when the hormone binds to the receptor, it's going to change the action inside the cell. It's going to change something about the metabolism of the cell. So let me just go through the definitions of those terms. A hormone is a chemical signal that's released by endocrine cells that will affect cells in other parts of the body. Now we have endocrine glands, but we also have endocrine producing or hormone producing cells in other organs such as the bone. The target is the cell that is affected by a specific hormone, and the target cells are going to change their metabolic activity in response to hormone binding. And the action is either the general or specific effect that is caused when a cell responds to a specific hormone. There's a special type of hormone called a tropic hormone. And I should say it's a class of hormones. And these are hormones that act on other endocrine glands. So the anterior pituitary gland makes many tropic hormones, like adrenocorticotropic hormone, which acts on the adrenal gland. Here we see all of the endocrine glands. In the head, we have the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus actually isn't an endocrine gland, but it is the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is known as the master regulator. And the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland. And so the pituitary gland is known as the master gland. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland kind of work together to control most of the other endocrine glands in our body. Also in the head is the pineal gland, and the pineal gland is the gland that produces melatonin and regulates sleep-wake cycles. We have two endocrine glands. We have the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland. The thyroid gland is the butterfly-shaped gland that we see, and on the back of the thyroid gland are four nodules that make up the parathyroid. Just over the chest we have the thymus. Down here over the kidneys are the adrenal glands, and in between the kidneys is the pancreas. And then we have the ovaries and the testes. The hypothalamus, as I mentioned, is the master regulator. It links the nervous and endocrine systems and controls the release of hormones from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is known as the master gland, and it has that direct connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland with this area right here called the infundibulum. And you can see that there are nervous fibers, axons, going to the posterior part of the pituitary gland, and more blood vessels going to the anterior part of the pituitary gland. The anterior lobe of the pituitary gland makes many hormones: growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid-stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte-stimulating hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So many of these are acting on other endocrine glands, and some, such as growth hormone, are acting on the majority of the cells in the body. The posterior pituitary only makes two hormones: oxytocin, which is important in kind of sexual and social behavior. It's involved in making the uterus contract during labor. And it's like the warm and fuzzy hormone, right? It makes you feel all cuddly and cozy. Antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that tells the kidneys to hold on to water. And so, when when you haven't had enough water in a day, your body will release ADH so that you urinate less and hold on to your water. Here's just a picture of the histology. Here's the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. The most important thing to see here is that the anterior pituitary has very densely packed cells, and the posterior pituitary has nerve fibers running through it. So not all slides are going to have the anterior pituitary blue, but you're going to see these dense cells in the anterior pituitary regardless of what staining is used. Next is the pineal gland, which I've already mentioned. It produces melatonin, which controls the day and night sleep cycles. And then we have the thyroid glands and the parathyroid glands. The thyroid gland secretes thyroxine. Thyroxine is like the suite of thyroid hormones that act on the majority of the cells in the body and contribute heavily to metabolism. In addition, the thyroid gland produces calcitonin, which in really high levels is going to reduce the amount of calcium found in the blood. But those levels don't really exist in the body, so we actually don't know what calcitonin does in the body. The parathyroid gland, of course, produces parathyroid hormone, which is going to increase calcium in the blood by activating osteoclasts and by telling the kidneys and the liver to hold on to the calcium. Here's a slide of the thyroid, and we see these follicles. Lining these follicles are these cuboidal cells called follicular cells, and those are the cells that make thyroxine. In between the follicles are the parafollicular cells, and those are the ones that secrete calcitonin. Moving down to the thymus is where T cells mature. The thymic hormones are really just involved in T cell maturation, so they don't actually go into circulation. As we get older, the thymus gets smaller and smaller. So as kids are developing their immune system, and so their thymus goes all the way up into their neck. But as adults, it's just a little mass of material over our heart. Next, we have the pancreas, which is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. Within the pancreas are regions called the pancreatic islets. Those secrete insulin and glucagon, two hormones that are involved with regulating blood glucose levels. Here's a slide of the pancreas so you can see this beautiful pancreatic islet. Doesn't it look like a dreamy vacation spot? It's surrounded by pancreatic acinar cells, and those are exocrine cells. So those are going to produce digestive juices and enzymes. So the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys, have a cortex and a medulla. And remember, when we were talking about the brain, the outer portion was the cortex, and then deep inside was the medulla. Same thing with the adrenal glands. So we have the adrenal medulla, again, the middle part of the adrenal glands, which makes epinephrine and norepinephrine, part of the fight or flight response of the sympathetic nervous system. And then the cortex secretes the glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and gonadocorticoids. These are involved with maintaining salt and water levels, maintaining glucose levels, and controlling sex hormones. And so here is a slide of the adrenal gland, and you can see, so there's a capsule out here, and this whole region up here is the cortex, and this region down here is the medulla. And we're going to wrap this up with the gonads, the testes and the ovaries. In the ovary, during the ovarian cycle, the follicle where the egg matures is called a vesicular follicle just before ovulation. And the vesicular follicle is going to produce estrogen. After ovulation, the vesicular follicle kind of collapses in on itself, forming something that's called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen, and this helps with early pregnancy. The testes, on the other hand, have interstitial cells in between the tubules where the sperm mature, and those cells secrete androgens like testosterone. Time to go through the photos that you need to label. So here we have the brain with the hypothalamus, the infundibulum, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. Here's the slide of the pituitary gland with the dense cells of the anterior pituitary and the nervous fibers of the posterior pituitary. Next, we have an illustration of the adrenal gland with the cortex and the medulla. And we also have a slide of the adrenal gland. So up here, this region is the cortex, and the middle region is the medulla. The thyroid gland, and then the posterior side, we can see the parathyroid gland. We also have a slide showing the follicles with their follicular cells lining it, and we have the parafollicular cells in between, right here and here. Here we have a model of the ovary. Here is that vesicular follicle we are talking about, with the ovum just about to be released during ovulation. Here's a little model of ovulation. So right here it's producing mostly estrogen. Once this follicle kind of collapses in on itself, forming the corpus luteum, it's going to be secreting estrogen and progesterone. Here we have the male reproductive system, and so we can see the testis. And the testis on the inside is made of a bunch of tubes, and so these tubes are where sperm are formed. So these cells are going to divide and ultimately turn into spermatids, and then the spermatids are going to differentiate into sperm. So here we see the tails of immature sperm. In between the tubules, right here, we have the interstitial cells, and those are the cells that form testosterone. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the pancreas. Here's the pancreas. The pancreas is kind of tucked underneath the stomach. We see the liver here. The stomach would be right over here. The pancreas, remember, is both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. So here we see the pancreatic islet. That's the endocrine part of the pancreas. It releases insulin and glucagon. And here we have the Sinner cells. So the island, the small island, is the endocrine, and the Sinner cells are the majority of the pancreas, really. And those are going to be making digestive enzymes and what have you. Okay, so when you look at a slide of the pancreas, there's often more islands than this. I picked this one because it had the clearest island that I could find. But if you're looking at a slide of the pancreas, you're going to see a few more islands than this. But really, there's many more Sinner cells than there are pancreatic islets. I hope that this video is helpful for you, and please email me if you have any questions. Take care.